Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're going to start just a couple minutes after 1 o'clock to let everybody join us today. We have approximately 225 people who have registered. So we got a big audience and we want to get everybody an opportunity to get settled in today. Again, if you're just joining us, know that we are going to go ahead and just give it just a couple more seconds before we turn this over to our CEO to do some introductions and get us started.
And I think with that, my computer tells me that it's 2 minutes past the hour. So hello, everyone. My name is Barbara Merrill. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ANCOR, and we are just really excited for you to be able to join us for today's webinar titled The Depth of the Cut, How Respectability, Performativity, and Inaction Can Ruin Your Organization. This is Membership Appreciation Week for ANCOR. And so we are just really delighted to have this webinar be part of our membership, all of the ways that we are telling our members we love you. But this webinar is also open to non-members. So we invite you to investigate ANCOR membership, and we just really appreciate you joining this webinar. So let me talk a little bit about it. A little background. In January, we found ourselves deeply impacted by Charlie Goodlett, Ursula Gruber, Nick Rangel, Lauren Tillman, and Anjali Valu as they provided really honest insight into the impact of tone policing. And as if you were on it, you know, tone policing is just one part of a larger problem known as respectability politics. So today, we welcome Erica Buchanan, Executive Director of Cadence of Arcadiana and ANCOR Leadership Academy Class of 2022 graduate, Dr. Not Javier, Exvier. I wanted to say Javier, but you're Exvier, Dr. Exvier Clark, DEIA practitioner and scholar, and Letitia Senyo, Clinical Program Manager at CRI and ANCOR Leadership Academy graduate of 2024, or rather candidate. All three are going to be providing us with honest insight into how respectability politics reveals itself in the workplace, its impact on employees, and recommendations on how we can create solutions based on a knowledgeable, do no harm attitude. So to get things started, I'm going to turn this over to Sasha Sensor, ANCOR's Director of Education and Intersectional Collaboration. Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you, Barbara, and welcome everybody. We're so glad to have you here today. So before we get to the content, I just want to give you all a couple of reminders. So first, please note that this presentation is being recorded and that this recording and any other materials the speakers provide will be available to you via the ANCOR Connected Community website later next week, in particular on Wednesday. Second, I'd like to draw your attention to the captioning option made available in the Zoom. If you look at the bottom right of your screen, you will see the More option with 3 dots above. If you click on this More option, you will find an opportunity to turn on the captioning. Please note that this is not a certified human captioner, so as artificial intelligence is prone to do, it's not perfect, so there may be some errors in the delivery of that information. Third, please enter your questions for the presenters in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. However, remember that part of being a strong ally is doing our own research and our own learning. So if you can Google it, we kindly remind you that you probably shouldn't ask it. So again, if you can Google it, do that first. And then if you have more questions, we are happy to answer those in this opportunity. And then finally, as this is a DEIA experience rooted in the lived experiences of all of our panelists today, we're going to honor them by not strictly enforcing the time. Traditionally, these had been 60 minutes. We've increased that time to 90 minutes to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to speak authentically and honestly to the questions we're engaging with today. However, if you do need to leave early, no worries. As we said before, we're recording and you'll get to see the rest of that information and view it at a later date. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our candidates and our panelists and ask them to introduce themselves and share why they decided to participate in today's conversation. So we're going to start with Erica. Erica, just 1 second. We need to unmute.
Here we are. Okay. So I'm Erica Smith Buchanan. I'm a native Texan. I now base myself in Louisiana, and I serve as the executive director of Cadence of Acadiana, LEAK, that organization. We're a support coordination agency. And so we provide care coordination as well as resources and advocacy for individuals who have intellectual or developmental disability, for the aged, and also for individuals that have traumatic head and spinal cord injuries. I'm also the owner and president of Violet Vision International, which is a firm that provides professional services and consulting in the area of staff development, leadership development. We provide building, construction, interior design. We provide marketing and branding, business startup and consultation. And we do that for individuals, for small organizations, startups, as well as nonprofits and Fortune 500 companies. And my why for today is because I really find this subject and the implications, they're so very important to the success of individuals. And being that, it's very important to the success of organizations. We see recently the DEIA agencies and offices and positions are coming under attack. People are feeling like it's not any longer necessary. And so I feel like we must lend our voices as often as we can, whenever the opportunity provides itself, for us to share why this is important and why it should be important to everybody. And so I'm so grateful, Sasha, for you and for Anchor for allowing me to lend my voice to the panel. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Letitia? Hey, friend, we've got to unmute you too. Letitia, we still need you to double check to see if you're unmuted.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay. All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Letitia St. Joe, and I'm a program manager with CRI, that's Community Residences. I am based in Northern Virginia and Burke, to be more precise. And I oversee a program with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I also oversee a big number of staff. My why for today is just the excitement to talk about this, because it's a pressing issue, but it's not always talked about. It's almost like it's happening, but it's a taboo to talk about. And so I'm excited that we're opening that door, and I'm excited to be a part of the solution, even if it's just the beginning of it.
Thanks. And Dr. Xavier Clark.
Hi, my name is Xavier Clark. I am a program analyst in DEIA in the federal government, but I'm not speaking on behalf of them today. But I'm also a scholar of DEIA and belonging in critical race theory. So I'm often very chiefly attuned to how do we reshape and transform organizations by us ourselves understanding our agency and positionality within those agencies. And so I'm really excited to be here today with you all to have a dialogue. And Sasha, I wanted to say as well, thank you so much for including me.
Of course. So before we jump into things, I want the audience to take a moment, and we're just going to do a quick word association activity. So in the chat section, you should be able to respond to us and for everybody. When I say the word or the name Rosa Parks, what are the first three things you think about when we mention that very famous woman, Rosa Parks? If you all could just throw some of that in the chat, we'll share out what we see. And that would be a really great part for us to sort of begin to start this conversation. Absolutely, seeing a lot of busts, social justice, courageous, advocate, strong, determined, fearless, civil rights leader, brave movement. Absolutely. All of those things define Rosa Parks and keep them coming. But I bet you would be surprised that some of us on this panel would have used terms like notable rape investigator or secretary for the NAACP. So part of this has to do with respectability politics. So what I want to share is that for more than a decade prior to being arrested and making national headlines, most people knew that Rosa Parks worked for the NAACP and was one of their top rape investigators. As Danielle L. McGuire shared in her 2010 book, At the Dark End of the Street, Rosa Parks, instead of becoming a leader of the movement she helped start, was deliberately turned into a symbol of virtuous Black womanhood, sainted and celebrated for her quiet dignity, prim demeanor, and middle-class propriety, which is probably not how Rosa Parks would have described herself. In fact, the night that she was freed from prison, there was a rally at a local church where she was supposed to be the keynote speaker. However, at the last minute, because movement leaders believed that a radical Black woman would scare white Americans and feed into white supremacy narratives that Black people were too wild for full rights and self-governance, they replaced her with a young and relatively unknown minister at that time. This was one of the first big speaking engagements for Dr. Martin Luther King. As we think about that, it's important for this conversation because these strategic choices by Black church leaders to encourage Black individuals, particularly Black women, to conform to white standards of expected behavior is coined in the book by Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham in 1993 as Respectability Politics. In her research, she looked at the Black women's movement in the Black Baptist Church and the impact that respectability politics has had. However, today we've expanded that definition in the 20 so years since its publication, and many activists would now broadly define this term as the codes of behavior that not only Black, but Indigenous and other peoples of color attempt to define their behavior when they attempt to use it to appear acceptable to a more dominant culture. So that's a whole heck of a mouthful. And as we learn in most of these spaces, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility terms are not universally defined. So today, before we get started, I think it's really important if each of our guests goes ahead and shares with you how they would define what we're talking about today so that we have a better, more useful definition to engage in our conversation. Erica, would you mind if we started with you?
Of course not. So when I think about the topic or the term, I feel that it is for us marginalized or underrepresented or underutilized individuals, it's this notion or the intentional muting or minimizing, sometimes eliminating of any act or physical presentation, any attitude or display that we feel the general majority will find unflattering, threatening, unprofessional, undesirable. Any of that, trying to mute any of those ways about ourselves that are really just natural. But it's the thought that if you can wear the mask, and I believe it was Paul Laurence Dunbar who wrote a poem in the 1890s about wearing the mask. And so if you can wear this mask, you feel like you'll be accepted and included, you'll be promoted, you'll be seen as, less offensive, and that it will in turn shield you from the systemic or either personal biases and injustices that you may find yourself under otherwise. But it's really just an illusion. You're not going to be shielded from that, but it is an attempt to shield yourself from it. And that's how I look at respectability politics.
Thank you. Xavier?
Yes, I agree with Erica, but I would also say it's the strategies and survival tactics used by marginalized groups to assimilate, navigate, or be safe within particular settings, such as school, home, society, the workplace, etc. So they're tools that you learn as a marginalized body to be able, as Erica coined it, to camouflage yourself and navigate those spaces to be included or have the hope of being included in that space.
Thank you. And Letitia?
Yes, I definitely agree with Erica and Xavier, and I'll just add that to me, abandonment really it sticks out. It just abandoning aspects of my cultural or political identity as a way of belonging or fitting, and or getting respect from the host culture, or what has been made to be the preferred culture.
Thank you. So one part that you all have sort of alluded to here of respectability politics is this idea of correct presentation. In our society, we're socialized to understand that what we wear, how we speak, even our hairstyles define us. And for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC individuals, this result we know is suppressing of one's cultural identity and assimilating to boost the comfort of others. Interestingly to note is that according to a 2019 Pew Research Center survey, Black and Hispanic Americans are more likely than their white counterparts to say that they absolutely need to change their self-expression when around people who are racially and ethnically different. I don't think that that is intrinsically surprising to us. I feel like as we do this work and we're beginning to learn, that's something that we've noted. But Erica, you have spoken quite openly about the pressure to present correctly in order to be accepted and treated with respect. Can you share with our audience about how you change your self-expression when entering predominantly white spaces, and why you feel that making that decision has been imperative for your career advancement?
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, I will say I generally, for lack of a better term, but I like it regardless. When I come, I create quite a big splash. And I do that for a number of reasons. I am 6'1" in stature, so that in and of itself is worth taking note of. So I also am very expressive. I'm expressive in my articulation. I'm expressive in my facial expressions. I'm expressive in my jewelry. I'm just all of those things naturally. But I do recognize, and I recognized early on, that that can be a bit much for someone who has an idea of what a professional woman needs to look like and sound like. And so I found myself over time having to be quieter, recognizing that just entering a room for some reason, not related to me, really related to the audience, they would feel like maybe she's mean. Mean because what? Because I'm 6'1", because I'm an imposing figure, because I own my space, because I articulate well and I have thoughts and opinions that I might be rude or too assertive or mean or angry. It's all of those things that just gets put on you and you really just open the door. So I recognized if I wanted to matriculate through my career and if I wanted to move up, that I had to, I will say, for the safety of my agenda, to not always share my opinion, to not to be quieter, to not speak as loudly. And I recognize that as I have managed people over many, many, many years, I impose some of those requirements on them. And so in hindsight, and certainly now, I do the exact opposite. I try to get people to show up authentically and let them know that, I really want to develop them for who they are. But I know that had I not been someone who presented safely in a lot of instances, if I wasn't someone who presented more collaboratively, although I would collaborate just the way I am, it was just too much for a lot of people. And so I recognized that I would not have been given the opportunities. I was even told early on, you're going to do well because people, you're going to be safe for people, because they're not going to find you overly aggressive, or they're not going to find you to present, they like the way you talk, or they like the way, just all sorts of things that are truly offensive, but they think is a compliment. It's just those kinds of things that you wonder, I'm sure you meant that to be kind, but it is so not kind. But I recognized that I had to take a lot of that if I wanted to get myself into the position that I find myself now, leading a business, owning a business, managing people, and mentoring people to show up and be their authentic self, and change, and lead from wherever they are, but make the changes, have people change because of who you are, not change because of, who they're not.
Absolutely. As I'm listening to you, I was traveling the country the last couple of weeks and met a young CEO who is a beautiful woman of color, and was talking to me about some of the comments that she got back on her evaluation about being too loud, taking up too much space. And I immediately thought back to our prep conversations of what we were discussing. And I appreciate the ability to be able to say, hey, I've got some really amazing friends who are CEOs who have lived your experience. Can I put you all in contact? And I thought very much about, as Erica, you were talking about your love of mentoring, right, and sponsoring. So when you have talked about that importance, you've also talked about the unique burdens that minority voices and organizations often feel, that they are being forced to produce like mini-me's, right? Like exact replicas of who you are. And therefore that there's only one way to acceptably present yourself in predominantly white organizations. Can you share a bit more with this audience about the additional burden that respectability politics plays, and why it's really unhealthy for an organization when they think about the return on investment when it comes to employee development, growth, employee retention, and just what that impact has for them, of why they should be thinking about respectability politics culture?
Sure. So as I've found over over my careers, not just my current position, but over my career, I've definitely found that the people that I answer to have seen the success that the organizations have had, the success that I've had, and they have wanted to reproduce that. So there's definitely a very high bar. And as the organizations have grown, and as people have moved up within the organizations, there is this notion that everybody that I promote, or everybody that ascends in the organization, will be some version of me. And there honestly was a time where I think I unfairly wanted people to be me, because I felt like that was the only thing that would be accepted. Not because I wanted them to be me, but I thought that I knew that was what people wanted. And so I wanted them to be successful. Just growing up and getting older and recognizing that I've lost some people who couldn't have, that wasn't what they wanted to be. And that was the reason that we lost some people. And just having honest conversations about how I felt about what was being asked of me to not even be me. And now I'm trying to make somebody be somebody that's not even real. I thought, okay, enough. And I've spent a lot of time, certainly where I am, sharing with the people that are leaders, but just those that come in the door, that they are welcome, that I'm interested in knowing who they are and what they want to do. What is it they want to do later in their career, and helping them have access to what they need to do that. I don't want many me's, and I have been very resistant to the board with any notion of that is success. You really do not. You have to have a group made up of individuals who don't think the same, who can push back on ideas, who can bring problems and problem solving to the table, if you want to have a dynamic and robust organization. And so I just know that to be successful, I have to do things very differently than what some people might expect of me. And that's what I intend to do. I just won't do the opposite, because no one will stay where they don't feel they are really welcome. And that includes me. And so to not give into that notion is where I start, and then not expect the people that lead with me and pull this charge forward with me are expected to be anything but themselves.
Thank you. Xavier, you are also an individual who believes in living a truly authentic life. As an individual who is both Black and non-binary, the dominant culture's definition of correct presentation creates additional layers of oppression for you. Your groundbreaking research reveals that there is real physical pain and trauma that results from trying to assimilate into a dominant culture's standards. Could you share a little bit about your research and your findings with our audience?
Yeah, so in my research, my dissertation is called "We Are the Luxury, Not Your Products, a critical structurational analysis of Black consumer experiences in luxury fashion." And so a big part of the findings that we found were that for many Black bodies, namely Black women, when they go into spaces, they deal with a lot of symbolic violence. So symbolic violence being violence that we often shun off as just being like, oh, that's just the way it is. It's gentle. It's these everyday little microaggressions that you tend to just overlook. And we actually found that for Black women, there were mental health implications for that. When they were leaving these luxury settings and a sales associate or anyone treated them poorly in a corporate setting, they left and they tried to speak away the emotional toll that was happening to their bodies, rather than sitting in it and understanding that violence was happening to them. And similarly, in the research, we articulate that there is a lot of neuroscience of DEIA, that in your brain, when you feel exclusion, the same parts of your brain that activate for pain are activated when you feel exclusion. And so often people don't realize that there's a physiological thing that happens. And the women that I was interviewing and researching with, when they're put into these respectability politics spaces and having to show up a way that isn't authentic to themselves just to get basic decency, led them to have outcomes that were against their bodies and against themselves, which then made them start policing other people that look like them. So it becomes a cycle that you have to go through respectability politics. So you have to place respectability politics on other people to create, as Erica was articulating, the mini me's, or creating the correct and proper version of what a professional looks like, rather than letting people have the experiences that make them who they are, bring that fullness to the workplace.
So both you and I have formal DEIA roles within our organizations. And what we know as practitioners that perhaps this audience doesn't know is that the average length of time somebody like us lasts within an organization is about 2 years. That's it, 2 years within an organization. So our work is obviously important, but as you're saying, can also be very toxic to the body. Could you speak to the unique challenges that face DEIA practitioners and what management might be able to do to support them in this work. And then once there, maybe we can talk about some solutions for our colleagues, because as we know, the people who often fill the DEIA roles in organizations either have visible or invisible differences that make them part of a marginalized community.
Mhm. Yeah, so often when you're in a DEIA role, what people don't realize, I think they see a lot of times the soft skills at the front. They see the special emphasis months, or they see that we have listening sessions. But what they don't see is the behind the scenes, the confidential conversations you're having with leadership and or others in the organization that come to you as the end all be all of inclusion, of accessibility, of belonging. And they don't realize that that leads to a toll on your body. As we always say that therapists need therapists, DEIA practitioners sometimes need DEIA practitioners. And because resource constraints and whatnot, that's not always in the cards for people that are in our roles. Thus, people don't see the amount of expertise that we're bringing to this work from a developmental standpoint, from change management, from other things of that nature. They're just seeing the things that we think are fun and fluffy. But this work is much heavier than that. And I think that's why there is a lot of confusion about what our work is. And so when thinking about what managers and leadership could implement into this space is in the federal government, we have resiliency officers, which help people that look at material that is hard, that is sometimes detrimental to their mental health. Those things also need to be implemented for DEI practitioners and HR professionals. I think sometimes our work is looked at on the margins, not realizing that without it, the business doesn't continue to run. And so creating spaces where we can also know that we're coming into the workplace and feeling safe and supported when doing the work that we do will go a really long way. But also, I think as well, to make sure that there's not a toll on our bodies is providing resources to us that are not just performative, but actually have longevity. So if you're noticing that a person only has 2 people on their team, but you want them to have a whole strategy, implement that strategy, everything, that's not always going to work, because 2 people can't do that when other divisions have whole teams that put strategies into place. So thinking about that equity across the board will lead to, I think, more positive outcomes for practitioners so that we can have a more safe and psychologically safe space for ourselves too.
Those are some great suggestions. What about colleagues who want to be supportive?
Yes, so colleagues, I want to be supportive. I think at the beginning, what you said is if it's Googleable, sometimes Google it. And I know that sometimes comes off very, I'm not going to say rude, but kind of like, oh, but the point to that is sometimes you have to be your first advocate before you go to an advocate. And I think when you're doing DEIA work, I think everyone wants you to always have the answer, not realizing that you're still learning things at the moment. So coming to us, obviously, for our expertise, we want that, but also be mindful in what you are asking of your DEIA teams. And then also, as a colleague, what does allyship look like in and out of the workplace? So why I say that is, I think often DEI professionals, when we leave the office, people don't think that we're leaving the office, that we are still on the clock. And message us things, call us, ask us to help with a crisis, and not realizing that we have to have boundaries for our own lives as well. And so I think if you look at us like you look at any other subject matter expert at the office, it will go a long way to see that we are here to support you, but we also have roles that we have to complete in the day as well.
In 1903, our Black sociologist, Pan-Africanist, and educator W.E.B. Du Bois wrote The Soul of Black Folks. And if you aren't familiar with this particular book, it delves into the problem of race and inequality in the United States. In it, he specifically talks about the need to conform to white society, and as we've been talking about today, attempting to do that while pushing down one's true self. And as a result, there's this sense of what is named double consciousness, or this feeling of two-ness, that you're constantly living with two souls, two thoughts, two unreconcilable strivings, two warring ideals, all in one body. So that was written over 100 years ago, and this is still the same conversation that we are having today. And there are many people who are still trying to attempt to merge who they are into what is deemed that acceptable culture. So as a follow-up here, Letitia, we'd love if you'd be willing to speak specifically about how you've seen respectability politics impact an employee's mental health. Xavier already mentioned a couple ideas, but I know that you can prep conversation. You spoke specifically about this pressure to always be perfect, and what perfectionism has meant to you, and the knowledge that you simply can never be your true self. Could you perhaps provide us with some more understanding about this need for perfectionism, and then maybe some examples to provide us with some additional clarity?
Yes, thank you, Sasha. It was lagging a little bit on my end. I don't know if that's the case with everyone. So if you can't hear me, please just say something. I couldn't agree more with W.E.B. Du Bois on what he wrote about the two souls, the two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings. I mean, that's like the constant battle for the minority, me included. It takes a toll on your mental health, having to go into a task that's already demanding and having to worry about the acceptance, having to worry about the correctness, having to worry about the perfection, you know, as has been presented. An example that I personally experienced was one time I went for an interview some years back. It was a panel interview, and I was the only woman of color in that interview. And although it went well, I was fully ready and confident to be able to perform the role. And the interview went well, as far as I know, and I expressed myself the best way that I could with the accent that I have. And after the interview, thankfully, I was selected, and so were the other my counterparts. And the feedback they gave me was, well, you had some experience, but you didn't really sound like your counterparts. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I can't really sound like my counterparts because that's me, that's my culture, that's what I know. And I was wondering, like, should it really matter? And they went further to say, well, you're going to have to work on that to be able to succeed, to be able to grow. And to me, that was a lot of pressure. And although I didn't like it, I sort of liked that they told me that, and that sort of prepared me, because that's been the trend everywhere. And that it takes a toll on, it's just mentally very exhausting. I'm just managing staff. I see that sometimes the staff get frustrated, not because they're not able to perform the task at hand. Sometimes it's just them feeling like they don't belong. And it's not that they don't belong, it's how the surroundings, it's how the society makes them feel. I don't understand your accent. You don't look like this. Why is your hair like that? And you're going into you're going to a room feeling already pressured that, there's a lot of things that are not correct. So mentally, it's draining. It takes a toll on you. It makes you, resentment can even set in, because you're already going in there feeling you feel like you're not on the same pedestal, and it's no fault of your own. Even depression, feeling that you're giving your best, but it's not always going to measure up. You have to do more than your best to be seen ready, or be the one that will be selected. And even anxiety, just going to meetings, you're worried about how you're going to present yourself. How are you going to sound? Are you going to be accepted? Are they going to understand you? Even the verbiage, like, are you using the proper words? Is that okay? Do I look all right? Do I sound all right? all of those things take a toll. And so at the end of the day, you're not even getting the best out of that person. You're getting the version that anxiety has produced. You're getting the version that, the pressure, the depression is pushing them to be.
Well, and I think you speak super truthfully, not that I wouldn't doubt that, but it sounds like 97% of all Black workers in the United States feel the same way. And what I'm referencing here is that despite all the efforts that you all have described of first trying to attempt to assimilate, deciding that's not working for you and not assimilating and trying to find your authentic self, none of this has eliminated workplace discrimination. Like, it's still there, it's still present. So clearly assimilation is not the productive path forward. And as we've come out of the pandemic and people are looking about new working environments, there's a lot of research being done, right? And Future Forum tells us that 97% of Black people in the United States, when surveyed, said that they would fully prefer to work remote or in a hybrid environment because they no longer have to worry about some of the things that you all have been describing today, and instead spoke very much towards the positive impacts of being able to just be your whole self in your home, in your own community, in a place that feels safe for you. So Xavier, one of your really important messages, the time for performative allyship is over. Like, we talked about it, we learned about it, we started at that step, but you've clearly said accomplices to change are wanted. Could you explain to this audience a little bit more by what you mean by the time for allyship is over and accomplices are wanted?
Yes. So in a lot of cases, when we think about allyship in the last, since the wake of George Floyd's murder, let's be very frank here, has been about showing up passively, that you are someone that is learning, that you are someone that is coming to work and is a quote unquote safe person, and that you are sometimes a voice and want DEIA initiatives to happen. But often that happens in a vacuum, and it happens to make people feel good. It doesn't mean you're putting any social capital or professional capital on the line to make sure that the space that you are working in becomes a better place and has better quality of life for everyone involved. And so a lot of times when I say that accomplices are wanted, are individuals that are not trying to do DEIA because it looks good, but doing DEIA because it is good. And making sure that we can have conversations in the workplace that sometimes make you and your other colleagues uncomfortable. As we've discussed in this respectability conversation, is we feel uncomfortable every day coming to work often. Our bodies are uncomfortable because we've had to learn to make ourselves learn to make our bodies be presented in a way to make you comfortable. And so how do you make sure that your colleagues are actually being able to come to work, be safe, do the mission? And that isn't always just through passive allyship. That performativity of saying that you're an ally is great, but at the same time, accomplices, there's a way more material consequences when you say you're an accomplice to something, because it means that you're fully involved in it. It's not just, oh, I say this, I move on. It's that I am putting 10 toes down and I'm going to do what is right, even if that means maybe I get overlooked for that next promotion, because I know in a year or two from now that this organization will be better and that promotion will come back around for me.
Thank you. Erica, one of the ways that you say that people can be accomplices is through the act of extending invitations and being a sponsor. So during our discussions, you spoke about how often you're not invited into places where businesses or the business of networking is actually happening. So one of the suggestions you offered individuals who are seeking to become accomplices is to not only actively participate in extending invitations into traditionally white networking spaces, but also to actively work as a sponsor once there. Could you share with our audience a bit more about your experiences with those lack of invitations, why the invitation matters, and then what do you mean by being an effective sponsor going beyond just the invitation extension.
Sure, thank you. So what I find is, despite my individual success, the organization's success, and again, this is over a number of jobs, not a single job, but that despite all of that success and despite my proven track record, that when it comes to some social event where we know that social events are networking events, or maybe it is just a networking event, but it's generally going to be social. I, despite even my other colleagues might be invited, but I will not be invited, despite it being very clear the success that I and the organization that I lead has had. And so it's just amazing to me to see the discussions after the fact, and you think, maybe did I miss it? Let me check my email. Let me check my phone. Maybe I missed it. And you didn't miss it. You didn't get it. You know, you were not invited. You were not included. And even to the degree of having, you know, when you have board members that are there to help push the mission forward, that are there to lend their expertise and their voice to the organization, and you find that outside of the few minutes they spend looking over your numbers and making sure that you're in good standing, there's no other engagement. Well, that's a problem, because again, they are solicited to support the organization, which means support you. And that means for them to give invitations to pull you outside of just that building, that your success in these networking arenas is to the benefit of that organization. How will the word of that organization get out? How will you get into circles that could further the mission, that could provide opportunities to us if you're never invited? And so it just amazes me that there's a failure to include, invite, or engage us. And I just don't know how that's so easy. You know, when you start thinking of, oh, I'm going to have this event, who am I going to invite? Erica never came to mind. Erica just never came to mind. And so it's just amazing. And I would love for people to just ask themselves, why do we never come to mind? Or do we come to mind and you say, no, just no, I don't know what I'm going to get. I don't know who she'll bring, who's going to be her plus one. Like, what is your reason? Like, you know, but what is the reason? I have made it a point to make sure that I am not that person. So when I am having any opportunity, whether some of my staff is comfortable with it or not, I do offer for someone to go. Do you all want to go? Do you want to attend? And then sometimes when they say no, I tell them that they have to go, because I want them to be exposed to the people that move and shake in this in the community, so that they can help further our mission and our name and our brand. So it's not optional. And for me, it's not optional to move our mission forward. It's not optional for me to get us more exposure, but the very people who have an opportunity to help me, it never crosses their mind to provide such help. And so that's very difficult. It makes it that much more difficult to do what we're doing. So the fact that we're doing so well, it's not to be contributed at all to some of the people that we elected to just do that very thing. It's like you had one job, just one, and you know, and I got to do that too. So I would ask for individuals to invite us, engage us, include us, and then once you do, acknowledge us when we get there, say something, introduce us to individuals, to be sure that we're not dumped in a space where we may not know anyone, and that you actually take an active interest in that invitation, that you engage them in that setting to make them feel comfortable, to be sure that they connect with some individuals and that you open up those conversations. Given our level of skill and our matriculation in these organizations, we can take it from there. Can you just open up some doors? Can you, as Xavier said, can you put in some of that social capital, some of that professional capital? If we really are about allyship and helping our organizations move forward, then that's what I would see someone doing.
Thank you. Xavier, as we were talking about this, you also came up with some great questions for people to ask for their own version of self-assessment. Would you mind sharing with our audience? Erica posed a couple of well, why don't you think about us? If you do think about me and you're not extending the invitation, why? But what other questions could people be asking as part of their own personal self-assessment?
Yeah. Do I only elevate those who look like me? What is my end goal with this group? I think asking questions that really get to the core of your why. I think often we like to think about the action, but we don't like to think about the why of that action. So when thinking about more questions to think about, I think it's posing them in a way that makes you think, okay, maybe I did have a gap here, and could have maybe asked someone else. When have I given someone else the opportunity to go with me to X event? Or asking yourself too, what is my end goal with the organization and its development? Is this mission first, or is this just that I think that this person should go to this? Is there a strategy behind it? I think often, sometimes we don't think about these questions as strategically as we do, but our bodies actually aren't thinking about them strategically. So don't let that fall without it being understood. I said, so I think it's being a little strategic in the way that you think about how you're going about the action that you're doing. And then also asking yourself, am I doing this for the right reasons, or am I doing this for performance? Do I care what others are going to think of me by making this decision? Or do I want to truly stand in my decision? I think often when we talk about authenticity and we talk about respectability politics, those things are also happening to the people that create the structure around us. And they forget that, you're also helping to reproduce that structure because you're stressed out by that structure. So asking yourself, is this how I want to keep making this happen? And as someone just put into the chat, yes, it's that bravery to say, I want to go against the grain to make this a better place, not just for myself, but for the employees of this organization from the top and at the bottom. Because I think often we do actions, but we don't think about the long-term effects of those actions and who it benefits and who it actually marginalizes.
Thank you. Letitia, I know that you spoke specifically to the pressure of trying to do your best version of you as the inviter might envision that to be in order to just secure the invitation. And that oftentimes that results in taking on uncompensated extra work and doing extra activities in order to prove that you are worthy of the sponsorship that Erica has mentioned. Could you provide the people managers in our space some insights on how to identify and rectify when this imbalance is happening in the workplace, when certain individuals are working harder for that invitation and what that means to overall worker retention?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I would say that as a manager myself, it would start with us because we see it happening and we're also managers to other people. Like Erica made a point earlier on saying is she building up clones? Does she want people to be like her so that then they're able to get that promotion? Well, it's the same thing that we have to work on. We have to recognize that, first of all, this is an issue. It's not often spoken about, but it should start being talked about so that, you know, we can put it out there that it's a problem and change can come from that. Also, being honest and open, and then, you know, how are you providing guidance or managing other people? For instance, myself, how am am I celebrating individuality? Am I celebrating diversity? How do I want to be treated? Am I speaking up when, you know, this opportunities come up, but they require me to do more? Should I speak up? Am I afraid? Well, I shouldn't be, because change comes, it starts with me. I'm the change. I have to start the change that I want to see. And so with all the other managers, my encouragement would be, start with you. Are you going that extra mile and promoting this culture? Or are you going to start by saying, I enjoy doing this role, but if it's something that I think I should be compensated to perform this role, I shouldn't be doing it to earn extra favors when my counterparts don't need to do that and they're still earning that. I'd like to do it, but can I be compensated? Speak up. We have to be honest about it. If we don't, it will continue. And then managers as well, we also have to look at it. Take stock of what we do as managers. How are we treating? Do we want people to all be like us? Do we want staff to be like our ideal staff? Or are we promoting them or encouraging them to be themselves so they don't have to do extra to meet up with the standards that we're setting? So I think it's an all-round thing for managers to think about, and also to make steps to move forward.
So one of the things that you all agreed upon was very much that, yes, the work needs to be done. However, that a lot of times well-intentioned managers will be afraid of making mistakes. And so instead of taking on the task themselves, they try to delegate it out to somebody who has a lived marginalized experience. Or when they like announce a DEIA initiative, they're kind of surprised that a bunch of marginalized individuals who fall into that category don't just run to volunteer to support the efforts. And so the question really is, well, what's going wrong? Where's the disconnect, right? And so you all mentioned that the biggest, most important thing for you was seeing sweat equity, that those who are white and in power are rolling up their sleeves, getting into the trenches and doing the difficult work alongside staff. Could you share some specifics about what do we mean by rolling up our sleeves, and what kinds of things can managers and leaders be doing to show true demonstration that it's not just word of mouth and performative, but that rather this is intentional, accomplice-like behavior for creating organizational change?
I think, like I mentioned before, being true to yourself, being honest to what you want to see, and knowing your worth and not being afraid to speak about your work. Because sometimes you're doing the best you can, you're actually performing very well, but because you're not so confident, you've been drawn to that place where you have to do extra to be recognized. You continue to do extra just to, to earn that that recognition. So in order to, I feel like personally, I would speak up. I'll make sure that I'm heard. I'll make sure that I'm out there being the role model of what I want to see. I'm making sure that equality is across the board with my team, because that's what I can control. And then I'm showing examples of how that works. Because if you're not doing it in your team and it's not working, what example are you going to show to the higher ups that, well, this needs to change? I would make the change, with myself, with my team, and then I'll use that as an example to show that you don't have to go do extra to get that. You just have to do what you need to do well across the board. And you have to acknowledge people who are doing well and reward them accordingly.
Xavier, would you mind building upon that as well as some recommendations you might have for how managers can show up for their team and demonstrate that they're really putting that sweat equity in?
Yeah, so I think often we get stuck in silos of mediocrity. And understanding what I mean by that is, instead of having silos of excellence where you're going that extra mile to understand why things are not working, and or to take off your blinders for a moment and see that there isn't diversity or inclusion in your section, sometimes we are cool with the mediocrity. And I think it is counterproductive a lot of times to companies and our bottom lines, because we are hindering the organization, to be frank. And I think it gives you an opportunity to look at what you're not looking at. If you keep seeing that someone might feel uncomfortable in the workplace, maybe talk to them, set up times with your teams and say, hey, I want to chat with you about some things you think could be better here. Or even asking other managers, hey, I don't get it fully, but how can I get it? And it's not always that you don't get it, you don't know how to implement it. And I think that is where you have to use your DEIA practitioners much more. We are advisors to you for a reason, to ensure that you do know how to implement something, and we're here to support you. And secondly, I would say equity planning. If you've never done an equity plan, sit down with your leadership team and figure out, okay, is this space as equitable as it could be? And how can we make sure that in our practices of how we hire, how we go about promotions, how we go about giving rewards and awards to people on our team and improving work quality of life, we're doing that for everyone across the board. Because I think often what gets lost in this discussion when we say this is that people think that we're saying only the marginalized need to be given that quality of life. That's not what we're saying. We want everyone in this space to be working from the exact same space, but we can't do that until there is equity at the same place. And I saw the best picture of this the other day. It was a group of people riding bikes, and each bike was the same height. And everybody was like, that's perfect, it's equality, right? No, there was a person with shorter stature. They need a smaller bike. There is a person like me who is a thicker body human who might need a wider bike. And so until you give those people those tools, you're not building in that equity plan. And when you're building that equity plan, don't think that when you see a gap that you have to be haphazard about how you fixed it or hasty. Think about it strategically. How can we actually put these measures in place, but also be transparent with our teams to ensure that they are on the same page of where we're trying to go? And if there are some hiccups along the way, that they feel empowered to be able to articulate things they need you to also do better in lieu of that plan to succeed.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing those ideas. Erica, got some extra ones we want to go into this equation for all of our audience members?
Sure. You know, one of the things I would encourage people that are empowered to do is, as Letitia said, be honest with yourself. Take an honest look at yourself and your motivations, as Xavier said. What is it? Why are you here? And what's your end game? Because that's the perspective from which you're making these decisions that impact us and others. I also would say that a person needs to look at what we're having to deal with and what we're having to face as a consequence of them not being inclusive, of them not being allies of ours. What it in fact does is it makes it more difficult to lead an organization, because they are an example. They see when their leader is not included in things. And so they sometimes can be a difficult group to manage. I feel like oftentimes there are behaviors and attitudes that I get that a white executive would not get. And that is a problem. And I think people sometimes don't recognize that if I were someone else, you would not have this issue in this workplace. You would not demonstrate this attitude or these behaviors in the workplace. But it's a kind of a dismissal sometimes, or a disregard, because to some degree, they see it in other areas. And so I think that you have to really take a look at what your lack of response or failure to include someone in such a position does for the people that they're leading. You're really setting a standard for engaging them and respecting them, and you're responsible to some degree for that. Although you're never there to see the impact, it still goes on. And it's just another one, when we were talking about this, it's another one of those cuts that we have to deal with constantly. So no matter how hard we work, as Leticia talked about, how much we are above the norm and the standard of what would be needed for the positions we have, we are way above what that standard would normally be. We still have all of these continual cuts that we have to endure. And as Xavier talked about, and kind of act like it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. We just come back tomorrow and just get it together. We got it. But you take these wounds and these cuts everywhere you go. It does not end. And it impacts our longevity, our commitment sometimes. And, it's not just the DEI officers who are flight risk, but we become flight risk too, or you wind up staying in place and just not being as effective. And then that can be to the detriment, it will be to the detriment of the organizations that we serve and the people that are counting on us, to help them. But we need help. And so it's just a cycle that has, to end. And we can't be afraid to tell people that we need help. One of the things that Xavier talked about is, we want a safe space, but people say it's a safe space, but it's not a brave place. Like, it's gonna be consequences. We're gonna be consequences. There could be consequences after this conversation. But I've decided that I'm prepared and I'm willing to take the consequences. It just means that much to me. So
thank you. And thank you everybody for your bravery today. We did talk about the importance of bravery. Somebody mentioned it in a question. I'll throw out to the audience that this is your opportunity to be brave. We're going to have one more question, but then open it up to our panelists. So if you do want to ask something, we have the Q&A section. So please feel free to go ahead and start dropping your questions there. So Xavier, last one to you. And Erica did a perfect setup for you. You introduced, I think, all three of us to sort of a new term of art, but not necessarily a new feeling, and talking about brave spaces. So can you share what a brave space is and why it's why it's bad, and what additional steps individuals can take to eliminate the need for courage from the equation? Why shouldn't courage be a requirement?
Yeah, so thank you. But I think often where brave spaces came from was from the activist communities of queer and Black communities in the South, but also in the Northeast. And so what it was that it was a sanction to articulate that safety is great, but it also is a limitation. And so you also need bravery. I can feel safe in a space, but it doesn't allow me also still to speak up. I can come to it and know that my body won't be harmed, but I don't know that my voice will be heard. So brave spaces allow you to make sure that you can say, without retaliation or being reprimanded, the things that you need to say, the things that need to sometimes be clumsy and not always articulated correctly, so that the discussion can get started. And when you ask about removing courage from the equation, is that courage should already have been a part of the equation at the beginning. The result should always have courage in it. So you shouldn't always have to think, well, should have courage right now. you should be safe enough and brave enough to have that in your workplace. And if you're not, and if managers aren't creating that for you, you as a manager, or you need to have a discussion with your manager, if you are safe enough to do so, about how can you create that type of space for you in your workplace. I believe that brave and safe spaces both have to go hand in hand, so that at the end of the day, you can have a psychologically safe environment.
Heard. So for clarification, bravery is good when it comes in a safe space.
Yes, bravery is a great thing. It's just that it should also be a thing that is baked into the equation rather than having to remind someone to be brave. That should already been given to them.
Awesome. Thank you. So there are some questions and some comments in the chat as we begin to close down. Are there anything additional that we want to ask? We'll give it a couple of minutes here. But in the meantime, while people are potentially thinking of additional questions, I'd like to say thank you to all of our panelists today for your wonderful insights. If you want to thank them as well, please feel free to send some kudos in the chat. They can certainly see your messages. And before we close out, I would love to just share with our audience, if you're also thinking about ways that in the next week, you personally can begin to combat respectability politics, feel free to share those ideas with us as well, or when we post things in the ACC, to feel free to have that conversation get started. I'd like to offer a few quick reminders. Coming up in the next month, we have Rachel Fuller and Rachel Newman, both participants in the Leadership Academy class of 25, who are going to be subject matter experts with the Relias training on July 18th about addressing trauma with individuals with IDD. And this summer, Anchor will be hosting the 3-part webinar series on accessible communications, which includes sessions on the principles of accessible communications, writing in plain language, and accessible digital content. You can register for them independently or all together. And more information about what we do here at Anchor and our sessions can always be found on our website. In the meantime, thank you all so much. I'm seeing lots of thanks and accolades come in, but panelists, we appreciate you. We appreciate your stories and your narratives, and look forward to continuing to do this work with you. Thank you so much. All right, I think that's all. Oh, we're still getting love, and I don't want to end until the love is done. So important. So definitely. I will say this is also one of our first webinars, by the way, where there were so many hearts shared throughout the course of what you all were talking about. So I don't know if you could see that on your end, but that's not something that traditionally gets done in our spaces. And you all are getting lots of hearts and lots of claps and lots of love today. So
I definitely enjoyed it myself. So
good. Well, I think we're there. And no, they keep coming in. All the love. Let's just, take it, marinate in it, live it, right?
Well, is that not a wonderful finish to such a vulnerable conversation?
Yes.
So I think that's a really good way to end such a conversation where you had to bear so much about yourself and your experience to feel the appreciation of those that took part in it with us and shared their time with us.
Yep.
And we're going to call it a day. Thank you all. Very privileged to call you both friends and colleagues. And I look forward to the next time we can get together.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Xavier. Bye, everyone.
Bye.